Hello everyone and welcome to the EVN Disrupt podcast. My name is Nishat Zaturian. I'm the editor of the tech section here at EVN Report. Our guest this week was Samson Avetian. Samson is the founder and CEO of Eqwefy. We spoke about how their platform is helping enable people from all over the world to invest in Armenian startups, including for non-traditional investors. We also spoke about the importance of financial literacy and encouraging more investments from everyday Armenians. Thank you for listening. Samson, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Let's start with a little bit of your background. How'd you get into the world of finance, investment, and tech?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I was in finance, maybe later stage finance, so public securities, investments, investment management for 7-8 years. I'm well familiar with that field to manage, money in general and mostly on the macro level, macro type of investments, long-term value-based investments. So that was 6-7 years back. I got back to Armenia in 2010, so previously 15 years in Sweden or so, then 2 years in Boston, HBS MBA, then decided to move back to Armenia. It was fairly clear in the mid-2000s even that Armenia is moving towards IT tech, and that's probably where the productivity and value add is the highest, so that's where we get the most impact out of the limited resources we have. So it was fairly apparent that even back then that Armenia would be moving in that direction, and I was planning always to switch somewhat to that domain at a later point when I kind of understood what's going on and build networks. So we started Angel Investor Club of Armenia in 2018. For 4 or 5 years we've been in that sphere already, kind of hands-on. And now a couple of years back we decided to move on and make this far more, much bigger engagement in this direction. So it was a gradual switch from one part of the finance towards kind of earlier stage venture finance and technology.
Does the Angel Investor Club act as a traditional angel network, or what exactly is the mission behind it?
Yes, I mean, it's a network. We have some 50 angel investors. It's basically a bit hands-off, so we kind of just introduce people. It's a network. And then the investors themselves decide how to proceed with the valuation, due diligence, negotiations, all of those things. So we're trying not to get involved as much in the actual advisory or anything like that. We do evaluate the startups and kind of work with them as well, but not to a large extent, just to make sure that's the model we have. That we might see some adjustments in the future, but we'll see.
Right. Let me give you a bit of a hard question before we get on some more interesting topics. Not that this one isn't interesting, but we've tried on the show before speaking a couple of times about actualizing tech economic productivity for greater market impact in Armenia. We often hear about how tech is doing really well in Armenia, but it still makes up a relatively small percentage of the economy. You're probably the first person on the show that actually has a finance and macroeconomic background. How do you see about what can be done to actually make tech become a greater part of Armenia's economy as a percentage? Because it still hovers around less than 5%.
No, it's an excellent question, because if you look at countries, how they compete, generally in the world, especially if you're a developed nation, you compete basically on innovation and productivity. And in that case, the society is also, and in general, the society needs to be kind of well versed in technology, so basically adopt technology quicker. So the faster the country as a whole adapts technology, the more productive the rest of the economy becomes as well. So it's not just about the tech sector, it's not about just IT and IT exports, because that's correct there. The sector is fairly autonomous if you don't kind of try to broaden it out. Now, how to do that is basically the more people participate in this and have, so to say, skin in the game and adopt technology faster. And when you adopt technology, when you adopt innovation, you also believe in, how do I put it? The sciences becomes much more important to you. And that puts a pressure on scientific investment from the public sector, of course, on investment in R&D from companies. So the more the society understands what's going on in the tech side, feels how important that is, has skin in the game, as mentioned, the more we, all of us and the rest of the sectors and, companies will adopt that too, because the companies, general established companies, need to compete on innovation as well. You innovate on features, you innovate on business models, you innovate on design, on technology. So when the society as a whole puts a bit of pressure and moves forward, that puts pressure on the companies as well to adopt technology and innovate faster, whether on design or features or anything like that.
Does it matter whether or not that tech adoption is happening from the Armenian tech industry, specific, as in like other sectors are adopting, are being faster to adopt technological solutions that are built by the Armenian sector itself to drive that growth, or?
I mean, we cannot build all of the products and all of the technologies and services in Armenia. A lot of the things, obviously, the best practices are not always in Armenia, or most of them are not in Armenia. So when you adopt a technology and these best practices on how to manage companies, for example, or technology, or bring in the best equipment, I mean, that's how you get productive. We cannot sit and wait and innovate bicycles, because that would take too much time, and we don't have that time.
Yeah.
So we need to both develop our own, bring best practices from abroad and technologies from abroad to do
it's
that.
also unproductive.
Yeah.
But do you see a need to incentivize local companies to build more for the local market?
I mean, if you look at small countries in the world, developed nations, like successful ones, most of the time these countries are not building for their domestic markets. It's just too small. The economics just do not add up. You cannot build a product or a service for 2-3 million people, and in that case, you have a much bigger market to work with, and then you know. So that's how countries like, I don't know, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, all of these countries do. You need to work with the whole world. And this is, I think there's a fairly good understanding of that in Armenia as well.
Yeah. And even if you're building for the local market, and within the local market, you're still competing with global products. So you're always de facto within the global market.
Yeah, obviously all of us use, whatever startup products we have, whether it's, Crisp or anything like that.
Right,
so.
Right. You mentioned a lot that people within our society need to have more skin in the game. You speak about this in the sense of engaging more investors within Armenian companies. But investment as a whole, just on the personal finance side, is a bit lacking in Armenia, I would say. It's not great in other countries either. Even in the United States of the world, which you might think of as having a really financially literate society, I think people really struggle to understand like the importance and the ways to like imperatively invest their money. I'm talking about like just regular people. How do you see in a country like Armenia, which has still really a nascent culture when it comes to these things, encouraging and educating people on becoming retail investors, becoming people who are not like traditional investors themselves, they're not venture capitalists or angels, but they have some money that they can be putting into tech companies, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very relevant question for us. I mean, we worked with Angel Investor Club, as I mentioned, AICA, for several years now. We get a lot of very good support from our angels, whether it's domain expertise, whether it's knowledge, whether it's investment. I would say half of the people come from abroad, and half of the people are local. But it's just not enough, because all of the networks that we have here, angel networks, we work more or less with the same, group of 100, 200 people. And in that case, to get a broader impact on the society is just not enough. And when it comes to kind of financial sophistication, investment sophistication, Armenia is a bit one of the laggards, I would say. We're quite behind on that. So investment starts from the saving point of view. First, you need to kind of save some money and then invest it. We're kind of country number 150 in the world out of 180 or so when it comes to saving. So the whole culture is more, at present right now, at least, is more oriented towards consumption. And obviously, when you don't have that much money to save, you don't think about investing. So we need to work on the kind of sharing the best practices, so to say, why saving is important in general. And a lot of countries do a much better job at this. And when you kind of correlate development, how rapid development of a country is and their saving rates, there's a fairly strong correlation there. So first it goes via saving, then it goes to investment, and then it goes to higher growth in the years to come. So we need to start from the savings part, and obviously And that's what we're doing is that, as well. And then you work towards financial sophistication, investment sophistication. I think it's about kind of lack of information, I would say. It's not talked about why saving is why investment is important. It is very important, whether you save and invest in Armenia or abroad, even there are different mechanisms that work that are beneficial for Armenia in that case as well. But yeah, the working on a financial sophistication, it's a lot of work to do in Armenia. But when you do that, you're not only promoting a specific sector, you're promoting even things like capital markets development. So a company like, I don't know, Team Telecom or Armenian Economic Bank or Agba, all of these companies have issued stocks recently, and people try to see that their money works for them and generates income in parallel with them. So when that knowledge and when that information gets spread out a bit more widely, I think people will be very inclined to move in this direction too. So it's just, I would say, lack of awareness on what the income might be, what the risk might be. So when people are more informed, they'll be moving in that direction, I think.
Earlier, you said that it starts with saving, then goes to investing, and all that's correlated with higher development on those rankings. Even before those, does just income growth come first before that, or can even in low income countries positively be impacted by this?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get that question a lot. If you look at just compare countries across the board and you kind of equate them for their income levels, the savings rate differ. It's just a matter of policies, a matter of societal behaviors, norms, cultural norms. So I lived in Sweden for 15 years. It's when you look back, how people think, behave, how they speak, what jargon is used. You just immediately tie it why those things are there ingrained. So you might not read in school in a book that why saving is important, how that comes investment, but it's ingrained in them
culturally.
Yeah, and the whole society is that way. And I would say it's not only Sweden, it's probably all the Nordic countries and maybe Northern European countries as well.
Do you have an intuition for why that is?
I think countries, all of them, go through different stages of development and learn on their, right things they do, wrong things they do, what can be improved.
But specifically Sweden, where you lived, do you know why they're so savings oriented?
I haven't researched that subject, to be honest, but I was in Sweden a couple of years back and was I think it was 2021, and was describing the situation in Armenia back then post-war. And I, got recommended a book to read, and that book was almost, I don't know, maybe not to 70-80% resembled the situation in Armenia with Artsakh these 2 years back. So when they lost Finland, and there was a huge trauma for them because historically both Finland and Norway was part of Sweden, the three crowns. And it was almost, very, very similar to what Armenia experienced. But that was 200 years back, like Napoleonic Wars.
Right.
So I think all of the countries go through their stages and learn. And a lot of times you want to learn on other people's mistakes, not yours, because you might not get another chance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Let's move on to the product you guys are building. Tell us a little bit about Eqwefy and how you guys are working on encouraging people, regular people, people who haven't traditionally been investors, to be investing in Armenian companies, Armenian startups.
Yeah, so the tech sector is critical for Armenia. It's just, if you look at the numbers, there is no other sector that can pull us out of this. Just because the rest of it, if you look at productivity value add per person, it's just finance and IT and tech that's the highest. Then come things like manufacturing, professional services. So at the bottom of it, you find, accommodation, tourism, or things like that, agriculture. Even in best countries like France, if you look at the numbers, Holland, it's just productivity is very high, but not on par with finance and IT. And obviously the resources that we have, the limited resources that we have, the geography, the number of people, the market size, it's just the only thing that makes the numbers work out is the tech. Obviously, we can discuss whether this is outsourcing or not outsourcing. Obviously, you need to move from outsourcing to more high value add, but that takes all of the countries start with outsourcing. China became, one of the leaders in AI, but they started in outsourcing as well. Most of the countries start there. So we can discuss how the rapid that move from outsourcing to product development needs to happen, and it needs to happen. But basically, this is the sector that needs to move us along, move us forward. But as mentioned, we have 100 angels, 200 angels that are Armenians across the world. We're all very grateful for them. But looking at the numbers and the funds that come in from local and diaspora, this is just not enough. If you look at let's say if we take all of the financial system in Armenia, let's say pension funds, banks, insurance companies, and let's say that's 100% of our money. Only 0.06% of that money goes to finance innovation and technology startups. So 0.06%. So
of the Armenian, of the Armenian, just money available in Armenia.
Yes, exactly. And that's including the diaspora money as well. So the money that goes to that sector is infinitely small, I would say. So if you want to build a future, and that future starts with investing, and the money goes towards investing, is that low, obviously that's not enough. You can count on maybe international VCs, international funds working and financing that too, but there's no reason why Armenia and Armenians' money should not finance our own future, so to say, in our own investments in this critically important sector. And it's critically important not only for economic side, it's also national security issues. These are things like can be used in different places, like AI, for example. So it's not just economic strength, which is very important. So one of the missions of Eqwefy is to kind of make sure that all of us contribute to this, establish the peace that we need to establish, and grow and develop as a country and get a successful and prosperous future. So if we all are part in this, support this, as mentioned, there will be impact on capital markets, there will be impact on investment sophistication, there will be impact on obviously the startups that will have another avenue to raise money. It will, many places. So it's a kind of very impactful initiative, so to say, and that's the reason we're doing this. It's not a platform for myself or our board. It's a platform for Armenia. That's how we approach the things, and obviously the ecosystem as well.
Tell us what exactly the platform is. How do I, as an investor, or how do on the other side companies use it?
So we've been working on this for a couple of years now. It started as a project at AUA, at Epic. It's their incubator for innovation startups, or startups in general. And then it got quite serious, and we decided to move this project to AICA and implement it via AICA, just to make sure we don't, we have a bit more freedom, because the mission of a university is not perfectly aligned to building an investment company. We started building this with AICA. We got support from EU. We're having, they're assisting us in building this as well. Then we had a fundraising half a year or so back. So it's a fairly broad and initiative that has been under implementation for a while now. And the whole, I described the mission, so the whole operations of it is we're going to have most of us, or Armenians principally in the first place, to have access to some of our best innovation startups. Some startups that other VCs have participated in, other professional, sophisticated investors and large investors have participated in. We want to bring the same opportunities our large investors have to the people like myself, or I don't know, my relatives, or whoever might be the general public. So we can use that product as well, also in the diaspora, of course. So that's the intent, so people can save and invest in those kind of companies. But we also understand that this is a fairly risky sector as a whole, and that's why when we approach the investment and savings part, we say that, okay, you have $100, you can invest maybe 5-10 of those in these type of startups. The rest of your investments need to be in other places, like stocks, bonds, whatever it might be. So we are taking a holistic approach just because of the responsibilities we have on this. So that's basically the mission. We want to just make sure every one of us has the same opportunities that the large investors have, and this kind of in line with the democratization process of finance. And I would also say that the regulators, both in Armenia and abroad, have been very welcoming of this. There have been more products, more legal solutions that have become even more available these couple of years. So there's a lot of support from both ecosystem and regulators and in general.
Mm-hmm. So Armenian companies will be on the platform. I, as a user, will be able to go on, select which one I want to invest in, and then make my investment. What type of what amounts do you anticipate investors, your investor group putting in? By your investor group, I mean your users.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we're going to be given that this is a new domain for a lot of people, or for most of the people. We're going to start fairly at small ticket sizes so people can go in, experiment, look how the platform works, how easy it is, how intuitive, how good the startups are. So we'll be starting at, I don't know, $50, $20, $100 tickets. So you just can go in and sell a cup of coffee or two. So this is very important for us. So in that way, the trade-off becomes not, okay, should I invest or not invest? So this is, I might lose or not lose. I don't know. I need my money is going to be tied up for a couple of years. It will be a trade-off. Okay, you can order another cup of coffee or a dessert, or should you kind of participate in building a better future for all of us? So that's why I want to start small so people can experiment. So can learn how these things work. And obviously, as I mentioned, not only for startups, but in general, people will get much higher investment sophistication, so to say.
Right. But in that case, how large do you anticipate the total amount of raise for the company to be?
Yeah, we're thinking of at least 100,000 or so. 100,000. And we're not going to list many startups, as you might, naturally we're going to list, we don't have, infinite amount of startups that are very promising, the returns are going to be high from them. So we're going to concentrate on fairly low amount of startups, let's say 3-4 startups per year, and then grow that number. And then in our case, we want to kind of grow the fund raising targets as opposed to just the amount of startups. We don't want to list many startups that we don't have good confidence in, at least at that point, or maybe they're just too early stage, so to say.
I want to talk about how you think about vetting them. But so thinking like if you want to raise $100,000 for a startup, so if we go a little bit higher than what you were saying of like $20, $50, if people, let's say, put $100 on average, let's say, which doesn't seem crazy, over 1,000 people, that's $100,000 you raise for the company. And at that stage, if you're getting in that early, you might see, if the company succeeds, you might see like a 300-400x return on that $100, which is pretty great. But what is it? So you mentioned that you wouldn't be letting on every startup, and you also mentioned maybe some are too early to get in. What do you consider too early? Because, like, for example, if $100,000 in Armenia, especially for a pre-seed company, that might be like half of their quote unquote pre-seed round, or like a quarter of their pre-seed round, which is quite significant. Like, you just got a company a quarter of their way to just getting off the ground a little bit. But for a later stage company, like a Series A company or a Series B company, which already is more well established, it's a little bit safer, you could say, because they've gone through a few rounds already, that $100,000 probably means less, right? On the investor side, you also get less return because you weren't as early. Now, Series A, Series B is still early, assuming it goes far away. So how do you think about what type of companies would be interested in being on the platform?
Yeah, so I think this is where the mission comes in as well. For us, the listing, let's say, criteria, so to say, is first, there's a general public knowledge about the startup. We're not the first ones to open this up.
Sure.
We don't want to our fiduciary duty is very important to us. We don't want to, we want our investors to take risks that are, same as the return expectations. So the listing criteria, other large investors have participated in this. There's public awareness about this. We also have our own corporate governance due diligence, finance due diligence, obviously team, market, all of these things, product due diligence. When it comes to which companies, I know 100K initially might be interested or not, that's where the mission comes in. I mean, given that this is the reason why we're doing what we're doing is for Armenia, get all of this broader participation and for all the impact aspects that I mentioned. So I think for the companies, for the startups themselves that are a bit later stage, maybe even Series A, as you mentioned, Series B, this will be somewhat of a corporate social responsibility to promote this type of a vehicle as well in Armenia. We have several very good VC funds. We have several very good angel networks, but it's also, there's no reason why these companies and the founders of these startups would not want to support establishment and the mission of Eqwefy.
Yeah. And if you think of it like, if a company is going out to raise a 15 million Series A, making it 15.1 so that you can make room for something important like this for the ecosystem is not a big ask of that company.
Yeah, I mean, it's based, from our discussions, based on the founder, what their approach is. From them, most of the time is just, okay, do not add a lot of admin on me and make this easy. And from the legal point of view, as mentioned, on the regulatory side, all of these regulatory aspects have gotten much more convenient, much easier throughout these years. And we're going to do everything to make sure that the admin part is as convenient as possible, doesn't take any time from the founders, as well as the kind of compliance issues and, what type of money we contribute with.
Right. Do you anticipate seed and earlier stage companies to be on the platform eventually as well?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. I mean, if this is a very promising startup that has had acclaim from winning competitions, I don't know, participated in accelerators like YC or Berkeley Skydac, we're going to be taking all of that into consideration, of course. I mean, we're not going to be having any hard red lines. It's just, we have, by the way, this is not as mentioned, this is a kind of a broad initiative, and we have a very strong board of advisors behind us, and advisors in general. The decisions which startup to list is going to be done by our listing committee, and on the listing committee we're going to have at least 3-4 people that have both VC fund management experience, angel investing experience, accelerated experience, angel network experience. So these decisions will be backed by our listing committee and backed by our board. So this is fair, objective, and in line with the best interest of our investors.
Yeah. In some ways, as a retail investor, I would feel more comfortable doing this in Armenia because, yes, the amount of startups in Armenia are much smaller. I believe there are some really high quality filters in Armenia, like going through the smart gates of the world and kind of getting that stamp of approval. You see maybe a few of those a year, right now at this early stage that get those. And whereas in large ecosystems like Silicon Valley, a ton of startups might get through those filters because there's just such a greater amount of volume that picking through those is much tougher. So in a way, I kind of like the fact that there's still a smaller number of startups that the attention is being focused on, and it kind of makes it easier for me to pick where to put my $100 this month or $1,000 maybe this year.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, we looked at some 30 different platforms like this abroad. This has been going on for like 10 years or so internationally. We looked at different countries, developed, emerging, 30 different platforms. We looked at, researched what the business model is, what the fee structure is, what the approach is. And there are some platforms that you go in and you see like, I don't know, 50, 60, 100 different startups that are, you don't have a lot of confidence, let's put it that way, how they do things and what the prospects are.
Because it's just too easy to get off the ground in those countries.
Yeah, and the platform itself does not take responsibility for those. They just come, okay, you want to list? Yeah, go ahead. This is, you go through some due diligence and they list you. But then they don't take any responsibility what the things might look like. In our case, we're far more serious about this because, again, this is all of our money, our retail money, diaspora money, Armenian money, and it's, we're all friends and relatives here and in the diaspora, so we need to take far more responsibility on the fiduciary duty side. So that's why we're going to take this far more seriously. And with regard to the amount of startups, we get a couple of startups per year that are fairly promising. And I mean, if you look at the numbers, I was counting the numbers the other day, even with the limited amount of startups we have already fairly good returns on the startups that have already had traction. I just read the news this morning that one of our biggest startups is going to be maybe first one out on the IPO list next year. And comparing to the ecosystem size, comparing to how much we worked in this direction, is far more room to go. But the numbers speak for themselves. We have fairly strong startups already, and that comes from the fact that diaspora has been there, and a lot of these startups, co-founders and founders, have had a lot of experience from abroad. Places like Switzerland, Sweden, US obviously, Canada, Armenia, of course. So it's a very larger pool of very highly qualified people with international experience. That's very important as well to mention.
Tell us about some of the case studies of a model like this working in other ecosystems that are in some ways comparable to Armenia. Like, it's not a huge market like the US, but has a smaller startup ecosystem that has launched something like this.
So 2-3 specific examples we'll look closely at was the Estonian one, Funderbeam. Funderbeam had an opportunity. You can also buy and sell shares in these startups before the exit. We looked at Seedblink as well, the Romanian one. And we looked at OurCrowd, which is the Israeli one. OurCrowd is probably have already raised close to $3 billion via their platform.
For the companies on the platform?
Yeah, for the companies on the platform via different vehicles. Yeah, $3 billion is a huge amount of money for a VC finance place. Let's put it that way. And obviously this comes from their innovation science strength, both in Israel and abroad, the same way we have in the diaspora. And it also comes from the money coming from the diaspora as well. So we're not comparable to that ecosystem, but there's no reason why
we can't get
things like that we should not learn from what other countries, what other ecosystems have done previously.
So what was the name of the Israeli one?
OurCrowd.
Do the OurCrowds of the world also attract non-Israeli and non-diaspora and Jewish communities to invest in it? Because like I'm someone who's in tech, I'm interested in tech. I constantly hear about how great Israel is doing. If I have $1,000 to put somewhere, why wouldn't I want to put it into like an early stage Israeli startup?
Yeah, exactly. They get a lot of, obviously my guess is they started with the communities, Jewish communities abroad and the Israeli communities, of course. But I think there's far broader participation, whether from even institutional investors like VC funds getting access to Israeli startups via that platform. And if you follow the biggest media outlets like TechCrunch in the world, and TechCrunches in the world, you see that a lot of times startups get co-invested via OurCrowd. So these are the top level startups where the American ones, well, not American, the Israeli ones get participation from VC funds, international VC funds via the platform. So this is high quality startups. And if you look at other platforms as well previously, let's say WeFunder is not it's a US platform. They also get far higher quality startups than, 5-10 years ago. They even have YC Combinator page when those type of startups also raising money. So the same way stocks, bonds have been democratized over the last decades, the same thing is happening whether with VC investing or private equity investing. And there is no reason why Armenia should not be on the front lines here as well.
So in general, there's a trend to sort of co-invest with traditional investors through like a crowdsourced investment
Yes,
vehicle.
of course. I mean, this is just a part of finance, and it's a very important part of finance. So obviously I've established companies like Coca-Cola, BMW, whatever there might be. But this part of finance is probably one of the most, if not the most important part for a country's development, as mentioned, given technology innovation is what countries compete on, especially in turbulent times. Obviously you can produce many different products, but technology is always critical when you look at everything. I'm not going to go into details.
Yeah. It's really interesting that earlier you said in these cases where these models have been deployed successfully, traditional investors go through the platform to make an investment. It's by traditional I mean like a VC or someone. I would have thought that the VCs, and you mentioned Israeli VCs, I thought they would have still gone straight to the startup in most cases. But is there a reason why VCs are looking to that as a vehicle?
I was more thinking about international VCs getting access to Israeli startups.
I see.
So if an international investor doesn't want to go through a VC, they can go via that platform.
Via the platform, yeah. It opens it up to them.
Yeah, you just basically go through and see what kind of opportunities there are and make a decision yourself.
When do you anticipate the platform launching?
So right now we're in the middle of the registration, or we're on the tail end of the registration with the local regulator, which is the Central Bank of Armenia. Given the fact that diaspora will need to participate or will participate in these investments as well, we need to cross-register the platform in a couple of jurisdictions. Obviously, from looking at our angel numbers and angel networks, most of these initial investors and angels come from US. So US will be the first stop when it comes to registering the platform abroad. So again, from the legal point of view, we need to make sure this is convenient for both Armenian investors and the diaspora investors to invest in. So we're going to be using legal solutions that are on not on par, the correct way to say in line with what sophisticated investors use. I'm thinking of SPVs. So they will be doing this via SPVs, and conveniently, so this is convenient for both the startup as well as the international investors or Armenian investors internationally. And we're planning to launch sometime in 2024. The timeline is a bit difficult to kind of set in stone, just because this is a regulatory process and we don't have a control over it. But we're at the tail end of it. The local registration we're going to be doing early next year in outside Armenia as well.
Tell us a little bit about what the regulatory framework around these kinds of investment vehicles has been, because there's been a lot of changes in the laws in Armenia over the last couple of years, and in the U.S. over the last 10 years at this point.
So I think it's all started with regulation crowdfunding in U.S., and this was, I would say, 10 years ago. So Jobs Act, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. So it started all there, and a lot of these platforms got established based on those regulations, equity crowdfunding regulations. And then it has proceeded. So we have 10 years in now. The Armenian regulations were put in place, if I'm not mistaken, early 2021. So under those regulations, the companies have continued. These are basically regulations that open the sphere, or open the sector in general. And then there's been a gradual evolution of the sector. Different platforms use the same regulations too, but might have different business models. Some have different type of fee structure. Some have, as I mentioned, different type of startups they work with. Basically, underneath the regulatory environment is basically similar for all of them. And that's, if you're working with retail investors or non-sophisticated investors, as they're called in Armenia, you're based on those regulations.
When thinking about tech companies specifically, though, or tech startups even, I should say, like most Armenian startups, at least for financial purposes, are U.S. registered companies, right? What regulatory framework do they fall under? Do they fall under the Armenian one or the American one? And does that matter for investors?
So, to put it this way, I mean, U.S. sets the rules of the game for the startup world and for the innovation technology in general at this time. And the sales market obviously is the largest one and most with the highest income levels. So it's no coincidence. A lot of companies in general, but obviously the startups as well, need to align with those regulatory aspects, with the fundraising aspects. Another thing that's very important to mention is, if you're a startup and you want to you take all of these risks and spend 10 years of your life and going through all the stresses and everything else around it, you need to make sure there is some kind of payback at the end of it. Obviously, mission is very important for a lot of us that work in the startup space, but there needs to be a finance payback at some point. And if you look at the U.S. markets, the premiums paid are much higher on exits as opposed to other places. Plus, there is a kind of already business customs of companies acquiring smaller companies, IPOing. So all of those things are already established. So both the startup world and innovation world in general is aligned to that. Now, in our case, we cannot go against the grain either with regard to our best startups or their opportunities to fundraise subsequently or whatever, have issues on the cap table because of different regulatory environments. So in that case, we need to align to all of these regulations and aspects and business customs as well. So that's how all of our legal structure is set up. So if you're an investor, you're going to be investing in a non-Armenian, to be more specific, a Delaware entity, the same way our angels invest in SPVs from Delaware, and that SPV in turn invest in a startup.
So then in that case, what is the relevance of the Armenian framework, of the Armenian regulatory environment? So
our platform is registered here, it's regulated here, but it's also going to be cross-regulated in the US and probably in the EU in the next instance. So there's a lot of regulatory oversight. So besides our own kind of internal corporate governance, approaches and board and everything like that, we have very solid regulatory framework that we work under.
And then lastly, let's just speak a little bit about the actual returns that investors might get on their investments that they make through the platform. Today, we're seeing companies exit much later than they were earlier. I think if you look at Microsoft's IPO, it just would be unheard of today for a company of that scale. Do you worry about how long your investors, your users, I should say, would need to be hanging on to that investment before they see it materialize? Do you think that might be like a disincentive?
So that's a good question. I think my experience comes in, and I will share that. So from one point of view, yes, investing in a startup might take 5-10 years to hold your money and then get your payback. And that's usually when we look at the return expectations of a startup, which one we're going to list. There needs to be returns are very important. Just because people are taking risks, the returns need to be similar or higher. So generally, returns have been, if you're doing okay to well, 15 to 20% per year for investors in the in the venture finance space. So this is the type of a benchmark we're going to look at. So if we see that startup has that promise, yes, that's one of the key criteria that we're going to have. And then 5 to 10 years, but then again, 15, 20% a year, not in total, right? But then on the other side, okay, this is a long time, and can I wait that amount of, can I allocate that much time, and how much money should I have set up in that for that duration? So that's important. On the other hand, we're talking about, I don't know, $50, $100 a month, and this is 5 to 10% of your portfolio. So this is not where you're putting your
retirement money.
Yeah, you're not going to be living off that money. Right. That's one thing. Another thing from my own experience, there's a good side to liquidity and there's a bad side to liquidity. And the bad side to liquidity is when there is some market turbulence, what people do, there's a lot of behavioral finance. People just start selling things. Things always rebound. The trend is always up. If you look at the stock markets in general, right, the trend is always going up, and you get stressed, and there's a lot of behavioral finance aspects come in, and you get stressed and you start selling. And then on the way up, so you materialize your loss, and on the way back up, you don't buy it back.
Right.
And it might take 1-2 years in the stock market. Maybe you sold at 1,000. This might be at 2,000 when you decide finally after a couple of years, I'm going to buy it back because you need to have some investments. Yeah. So it's both pluses and minuses with the liquidity. We always saying you need to have some liquid assets, bank deposits, bonds, and things like that in your portfolio. And some things need to be longer term, and this is one of the things that need to be long term. Yes.
That's a very good point. Do you think there would be secondary markets where people could sell that equity? I guess not if it's done through an SPV, right?
So one of the platforms I mentioned, Funderbeam from Estonia, had a secondary market. And there is no reason not to think that there might be a secondary market as a next stage of this whole evolution. I think Funderbeam was one. I think Start Engine has a similar project in motion where you can actually sell it before the exit of a startup. So there is liquidity in between. So I wouldn't exclude that might happen as well. Again, there's pluses and minuses on both the liquidity side.
Honestly, the way you laid it out made such great sense. And I think anybody who has any experience with just being a retail investor has gone through those pains that you mentioned at times. And sometimes it's better to just not even, it sounds bad, but it's like just not trust yourself with the ups and downs of the market.
I'm going to give you another example. So Robinhood was a hit.
Exactly.
Let's say 2 years ago. A lot of people started using Robinhood. And we also been discussing internally, do we want to do it as Robinhood? A lot of hype, a lot of trend, a lot of buzz around it. But if you look at the stock price of Robinhood, just because of that approach to things, I think it's down like 70-80%. So they create a lot of buzz, didn't take a long-term fundamentally sound approach or I might be speculating, but they might have done that, but it didn't work out that way. But in any case, we decided to do it more long-term, fundamentally sound, investor point of view principle for us, fiduciary duty. So
very disciplined. Yeah.
So from that sense, we're working with our customers and investors on the long run, not to generate a couple of highly successful investment campaigns upon launch.
In the Robinhood example, I guess, I don't know, maybe there's something interesting that Robinhood could have done, but it's largely just the nature of the assets that people are investing in through Robinhood that causes that crazy fluctuation, right? But I would love to see something as easy to use as Robinhood in Armenia for assets that are available to people that live in Armenia, right?
Yeah. I think so. One of our principal points is make sure that this is easy to use. So for a couple of clicks, you go in, you evaluate, and you trust the fact that we have done a lot of due diligence, corporate governance checks by the board and all of that. But the whole process for you as an investor will be easy. But then there are also platforms in Armenia that we also, again, we're taking a holistic point of view from an investor side, so investment portfolio. So we have also platforms in Armenia that are having opportunities to invest in Armenian listed companies. So you can go in and buy a stock in a bank or a telecom company via your app. Whether this is a bank app or an investment company, I can mention names like Sirius Capital is one, Apricot Capital is not. I'm not mentioning others because there are several of them. So from an investor point of view, you can get exposure to Armenian and also international stocks via some of these platforms.
Right. Last question. Where do you hope to see Eqwefy in 5 years? Hard to ask when you haven't launched yet, but still.
No, I think our key point is to pursue the mission that we have in front of us and to make sure that all of us participate and we get to a point where this critically important sector for Armenia is broadly backed and the diaspora can participate in this, and that money that diaspora sets aside is used productively, and it's basically teaching a man how to fish point of view, right? I'm a partially diaspora from diaspora myself.
Right.
I have sympathy for a lot of the perspectives that people have.
Actually, we didn't speak about the diaspora, so maybe let's just spend a little bit of time on that too. What's your pitch to the diaspora? Because I grew up in the diaspora my entire life. I've only been in Armenia for 4 years now. All my life, I've heard that we wish there was a way to be investing in Armenia more easily and into like really impactful things. Now it seems like you're creating that. Give the pitch, like for a diasporan who's listening. Why should they be engaging in the platform?
So, to get a successful, prosperous country, it needs to be sustainable economics behind it, because economics drives everything. The other thing is, the critically important, as I mentioned, is innovation technology. So you get access to both of these things via this platform. You get access to both the economics of it, economy impact. You get access to innovation technology impact, also via financing, but also via technology adoptions across society. So you're supporting that movement. That's very important. So these are the two principal issues that I would say. What else? Yeah, another thing I would mention is sometimes we have a board of some nine people. I would say like more than half of them are from the diaspora. So there's a lot of work and a lot of empathy for the points of views from perspectives from the diaspora. We have people from West Coast, East Coast, Middle East, Armenia, obviously. So we get all of these inputs and ideas and we process them, and we make sure that this is in line with everyone's interests in Armenia and abroad. Again, we need to make sure that we, participate in the sustainability and building a sustainability behind it. And obviously there are investment returns. For Eqwefy to be successful, our investors need to be successful.
Yeah.
They need to make money. This cannot work out otherwise. The impact is a huge part of that, but the investment side is at least 50% of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Samson, thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you a lot of luck with it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Najda. Very kind of you.